Good morning, good afternoon, depending on when you're viewing this. I wanted to review some lab forms that we'll be using as we work in the lab with children during the semester, whether you're taking this in summer or in the regular semester. Hopefully this will help you prepare and be clear on what you need to submit and how you can best document what you're learning. So the child running record is one form that we'll use, and you always want to be sure that you fill in the top information so that you ethically represent when you've observed the child, how old they are, and the setting and things like that. Keep in mind, whenever we're using a running record, it is a detailed narrative. So it's going to take up all of this space. And if you kind of picture this font size, you're going to have a beginning, a middle, and end, and it's going to fill this if you are to demonstrate appropriately and professionally your ability to use the running record. So keep that in mind. It's a detailed narrative. Everything the child says and does in 3 to 5 minutes. So keep that in mind. You're not observing different things in the classroom, just that activity for 3 to 5 minutes. And then you're going to use that information to assess what you think you might have learned about the child. So be sure you use seems to, might be. We call these tentative terms to just represent that we don't have all the information. This is what we've gathered and we think might be happening. Once you've observed, you're going to interpret, and you're going to first think about developmental domains and then also links to early learning standards. I encourage students to make 3 connections to each. You can do more, but doing less will make it difficult for you to demonstrate what you've learned about the child in a complete and professional way. Sometimes students will say, child seemed to demonstrate standard, and I'm making this part up, 1.9, use various art media when she painted and printed with the sponges. So in this case, if you're observing, you're also seeing the child use possibly gross motor and fine motor skills, and you can make that a different comment. Some students will attach it here by just simply saying physical skills, gross motor. So you think about how best you want to do that, but when you note the standard, please give the specific standard and example. Don't just give a number, because neither one of us will remember that later when we need to reflect on what we've learned about the whole child. Down here, you're going to look over your entire observation, the details, and say, what did I learn the most about this child's development? In this case, I picked physical, and then you would rate it based upon what you're learning and what you know, and then explain why. What skill are you specifically saying is proficient or not yet, and why? What did you see? Lastly, you're going to think about, specifically, what would you plan next? If you know this child loves art, or you know this child loves to build, how could you plan your next step depending on your course? If it's arts, you might do an arts-based activity, but if it's science or something else, and how do you bring that content in to further support the child? So be specific there. The next form that we might also be using is the anecdotal record. This is a written description of an incident. So in this case, we're going to capture several incidents on one form. As a teacher, you might have a file or note cards that you capture these on each day, but I'll ask you to capture at least 3 different times within your lab experience that can give you information about the child's interactions throughout the day, maybe different settings, different activities, different moods, and I'll ask you to give at least 3 to 4 sentences each time you pick a time to document. And then down here, you're simply going to look at, well, what did I learn? Across the span of the time that I was there and the information that I gathered, what did I learn about the child's development? In this case, perhaps the child's language. In this case, perhaps the child's physical skills, or even relationship with the teacher, depending on what you gather in the other 2. And you choose these times when you think, wow, this is something that's important, or this is interesting. And then what other standards also might be evidenced here in this child's development. Okay, so two different forms. One is much briefer, and this is typically the anecdotal that I use in a classroom when I taught second grade. So it just was on note cards that I had for each child, and each day I would date the observation that I gathered. It could even be as simple as the child forgot his homework, here's what he said, here's what happened, and I would gather that information. And at some point I would go back and assess how that child was doing based upon the information I had gathered. So the last piece here is a lesson plan. This won't happen until we get into week 5, but I wanted you to just be able to reflect here and understand you're going to, as you plan, you're going to fill out the top part, making sure you document the lab number you're working on and the date of it. You don't have to have your cooperating teacher sign it, but you will always be discussing it with him or her ahead of time. Here you're going to document, 6 to 8 sentences on observations from the prior week that have helped you decide that this activity is appropriate. So the specific interests of your child and their abilities, that's the one you're going to focus on. The whole group, and even how the children are responding to maybe themes that the teacher has chosen or the materials the teacher has in the classroom. All of that should give you information that helps you plan appropriately based on learning that you want the children to do. So I'm going to skip this for a second and come back to it. The learning objective, you're going to decide what standard. So if you are having the children do something in the area of science, which we will be doing, then go to that area in your early learning standards and indicate the standard title and outcome and write it out very clearly. The learner will meet standard ... which says ... when they ... which will explain what your lesson is. The Art is a Way of Learning framework, it comes directly from, let me find it here, our manual, and I seem to have lost my manual here, but if you go into your manual, the AWL curriculum framework, let me see if I can pull it up here. No, it won't let me. But you're going to go to science, and you should be able to click this when you're not watching the video, and you'll see a curriculum goal area, very clearly highlighted. There are 4 of them. Represent and express, inquire and solve problems, connect with family and culture, build understanding of self, and you will pick one and you'll look at the descriptors underneath it, and you will write a sentence that says, I plan to meet this goal area when we do this during my activity. The language of learning will always be science in our class this semester, but you will often find that it integrates into others. In this case, though, you will say, we will focus on the language of science, and then you will look at the concepts of science, such as biology, physics, and the inquiry-based connections, such as problem solve and evaluate, and you will write a sentence that says what you plan to do in that regard. Always wanting you to think about how you're going to include children individually. How will you meet their needs so that all children can be involved in your experience? And so thinking about your specific experience, think about specific things that you will do to make sure all children can be involved. Down here, you're going to think about how you would introduce your activity. That's the hook. That's how are you going to get their attention? Are you going to read them a book? Are you going to show them a picture? Are you going to sing a song? Are you going to bring in the different leaves or pine cones? Or what are you going to do to get them to go and want to be involved in your activity? The next thing will be a few specific skills you're going to focus on. And then here, you're going to write step by step. What's the first thing you're going to do? The second thing you're going to do? And that should be clear enough that anybody could pick up your lesson plan, say a substitute, and teach your lesson. Find your materials. The materials must be listed clearly. The author and title of books, the title and the location of a song. Art materials can't just say art materials, but are you talking about paint, paper, sponges? Again, planning is critical to your confidence and your success, and also managing classroom behavior. If you're not clearly prepared and planned that will have an effect on children's behavior as well. I'll talk more about this later, but at the end, after you've done your lesson the following week, you will assess and submit how did the children learn based upon what you planned, and how did you do with teaching skills and strategies. So you'll talk about teaching skills you used that went well, such as support, stretch, stimulate, and so on. And then what specific strategies, when you look in your student manual, what strategies of support did you use? Because there's many ways to support. So I'll talk about that later, but I wanted to give you just kind of a overview of what lab would look like. So I look forward to talking with you more about this, and I will see you in our meeting.